US President Donald Trump says he plans to meet Vladimir Putin soon to discuss how to end the war in Ukraine. Any such meeting would reverse years of isolation of the Russian leader following his full-scale invasion of the country. It comes after Mr. Trump made two phone calls, one to the Kremlin, the other to Ukraine's President Zelensky. So this map illustrates the extent of Russian progress in this war, and that's shown in red, with territory held or retaken by Ukraine in purple. Now, if the talks do begin, it's unclear on exactly what terms. Our North America correspondent, Merlin Thomas, has more.
President Trump and Vladimir Putin aren't exactly friends, certainly not allies, unless there's something to gain. And for President Trump, it's ending the war in Ukraine.
We had a great call, and it lasted for a long time, over an hour this morning. I also had with President Zelensky a very good call after that. And I think we're on the way to getting peace. I think President Putin wants peace, and President Zelensky wants peace, and I want peace. I just want to see people stop getting killed.
And an in-person meeting is on the cards.
He'll come here and I'll go there, and we're going to meet also probably in Saudi Arabia. The first time we'll meet in Saudi Arabia, see if we can get something done. But we want to end that war. That war is a disaster. It's a really bloody, horrible war.
After he spoke to Vladimir Putin, President Trump also spoke to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who described their conversation as meaningful.
We discussed many issues, and President Trump informed me of what Putin told him. We believe that America's strength is enough, together with us, to pressure Russia and Putin towards peace.
But ending the war on Mr. Trump's terms may come at a cost to Ukraine and restoring its original borders.
It certainly would seem to be unlikely. They took a lot of land, and they fought for that land, and they lost a lot of soldiers.
But the heightening talk of peace has changed little in Kyiv, where Russian missiles continue to target Ukraine's capital. The road to peace will be neither straight nor smooth for Ukraine, and on whose terms and at what cost. Merlin Thomas, BBC News, Washington.
And there is a NATO defence ministers meeting taking place right now in Brussels. So these are pictures coming to us live. You can see many of the ministers there having conversations. And top of the agenda, as we've been hearing, and as you'd expect, will be war in Ukraine, particularly following those two phone calls that were held between the US President and Vladimir Putin first, followed by a second call to Ukraine's President Zelensky. And we've heard a number of comments from a number of individuals, including the US Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, reiterating, number one, that the US will not be putting troops in terms of troops on the ground, or NATO troops should not be used in trying to find peace in Ukraine, and primarily that European nations should step up, as he said, and NATO spending, the figure has been put at around 5%. So we'll be watching that meeting in Brussels throughout the day, and obviously a number of press conferences will be held by key figures later, and we'll bring you that live right here on BBC News. Well, speaking ahead of that conference, as I said, was the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. This is some of what he said.
Well, it's a great morning. The United States is proud to be here, proud to be a part for a very long time of NATO, and ensuring NATO remains robust and strong, maintaining deterrence on the European continent. You know, a lot of people don't know, in Afghanistan, I served under a NATO mission as a U.S. troop alongside a lot of brave NATO troops. That was a different kind of mission for NATO, far-flung after America was attacked. The war in Ukraine, the aggression by Russia, has been a factory reset for NATO, a realization that this alliance needs to be robust and strong and real. And that's why President Trump has called for increased defense spending across the board for NATO, for European countries to recognize this is an urgent, real threat to the continent. This aggression needs to be a wake-up call. Americans are an active part of this alliance, as we have been and will continue to. But when it comes to defense spending, even 2% of GDP is not enough. 3 and 4, and ultimately, as President Trump has said, 5% of defense spending is critical. A realization that there is a Russian war machine that has sought to take more and more land in Ukraine. And standing up against that is an important European responsibility. And of course, the United States has been there for a long time as well. My role as a representative of the United States is to speak realistically about the course of that conflict. And I think you saw from President Trump yesterday, who himself is the best negotiator on the planet, bringing two sides together to find a negotiated peace, which is ultimately what everyone wants.
And that was the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth speaking on his way into the NATO Defence Ministers meeting taking place in Brussels as we speak. More on that as and when we get it. In the meantime, our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse, who's in Kyiv, offered an outline of how the phone call between President Trump and Vladimir Putin would dominate those discussions today.
You have this conference centre in Brussels yesterday in which America's new Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth laid out America's position in a very blunt message. Ukraine was left in no doubt as to what the Washington stance was in terms of it having to cede territory to Russia and in terms of it never joining the NATO military alliance. Today, I think from defence ministers, we're going to see a bit of a diplomatic messaging, where we're already seeing, the UK Defence Secretary John Healey talk about there not being able to be any negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine. That's something President Zelensky says all the time, and yet we just need to look at the last 12 hours to show that it's been anything but that. You have a warm conversation, it seems, between Vladimir Putin of Russia and Donald Trump of the US. And President Zelensky, meanwhile, here had to wait his turn. He had to wait for his biggest ally to get off the phone with the invader of his country. And then he talked about them agreeing that America's strength and Ukraine's strength would be enough to pressure Russia into some kind of a peace. But I think it's Ukraine that's feeling the heat at the moment in terms of the position it's going to have to adopt. And the uncertainty over how a frozen conflict might materialise. America said there will be foreign troops here, but it's just not going to be us. Europe needs to step up in that regard. There's a lot of missing detail over how Ukraine can exist as a strong sovereign country, as Western allies put it, all with Russia now retaining control of a fifth of its territory. There are a lot of unanswered questions over how a ceasefire might hold and the reliance that will have on foreign troops. There are a lot of unanswered questions, but of course people want peace as well. This is what wars do. There are Ukrainians who have seen enough in terms of devastation and death, but of course it's always been existential. It's been a fight for survival, and just because there are heightening talks of peace, it does not mean peace is coming closer.